So on top of that previous class, I wanted to cover a couple of scenarios.
Mhm.
Assume I have two classes, super class and subclass.
Right.
Here, four important statements that you have to remember is the first one is if a superclass method is throwing the exception.
Mm.
Okay, so in the method signature, assume there is a method called add, and this add method is throws the exception. Okay,
Mhm.
so subclass should throw the exception. Point number one. So if when you override the method, it should throw the same exception. When superclass throws an exception, can subclass throw exception type means child exception. So exception type accepted. Okay, this is child exception accepted. When a superclass throws exception type, subclass can throw the exception type or subclass can throw the exception type. Okay,
Mm.
but when superclass is throwing the exception type, subclass should not throw. Subclass should when a superclass throwing exception type, subclass should not throw the exception. So these are the key things that we have to remember. Okay, so assume I
Okay.
have two classes, the class A and class B. B class is extending A. Now you are doing the overriding, and the method which is present in the super class is throwing an exception.
Mm.
Then subclass has to be throw the exception. When a
Okay.
super class throwing an exception, subclass can throw the exception type. When a super class is throwing the exception type, subclass has to be throw same exception type. When a super class is throwing the exception type, subclass cannot. We cannot. We cannot throw the exception. It will gives the compile time error. Okay.
Mm.
So these are the things that you have to follow.
Okay.
So some questions I have discussed in yesterday's class. In the more of practical questions, we will discuss in the practical sessions actually. So that
Okay.
methods we can call it actually. So the things that we will discuss.
Right. So, is there any difference, in checked exception and unchecked exception in child
Yeah,
and
I'm
in
sorry. I'm sorry. So basically, we have two different types of exceptions. One is checked and unchecked exceptions. To remember very simply, one thing that you have to remember. Okay,
Mm.
compile time exception. So compile time exceptions are checked exceptions.
Mm.
Compile time exceptions are checked exceptions. Here two things that you have to remember. Simple thing. It is starts with C and it is starting with C. If it is not
Mm.
matched, you can consider that is a runtime exceptions. Okay, runtime exceptions are unchecked exceptions. There are a couple of things that we will try to discuss. And runtime exceptions are unchecked exceptions. Okay, so
Mm.
now what is the compile time exception and what is the runtime exception and why we are calling this as a compile time exception? The reason why, see, basically you have the super classes that was present. That means there is some class that you are using. If in case if I take a thread class, I'm using the thread features. There is some method if I'm using that may throws the interrupted thread exception, and I'm trying to call the thread, and parallelly it is giving some issue actually. So that time interrupted exception that will give. Like if I'm trying to access the free defined library like MySQL connector jar, and when I try to access any of the interfaces at free defined methods, there will gives the some exceptions like SQL exceptions, and this one class not found exception when we try to access the driver, we will get some kind of exception. So what it means is basically you are inheriting the features of the class which is present as per the hierarchy. What you have to do is this is the hierarchy that you have to follow, that exception is throws. Why it is a compile time, why can't we have it this in the runtime actually? The first thing what it states is whatever code that you are writing, right? JVM does not knows whether it is going to be a valid scenario or not. When you will come to know is the first thing will be the moment you written the code, first compilation will happen. During the
Right.
compilation, grammar check and free default library check will happen. During the
Mm,
compilation, what will happen is we have the 53 reserved words. So based upon the reserved words that you are using, the code you are using properly or not. It means you are writing the private constructor and you are accessing them into another class. So that is
mm,
comes to the reserve word, and that will having some instruction in the Java that they have defined in the JRE system library. So when you use it will tell that you have to do this operation. And when you use the arithmetic operation plus or minus tells that okay you are using plus symbol, that means you have to do the addition, right? So
mm,
likewise there are set of instructions they have defined. First phase is compilation. After compilation, next runtime. Runtime work is basically translating the our simple English or Java programming language into the bytecode, and bytecode will be converted if the response is getting by the system. Bytecode will be translated into the our simple language. The key thing will be played by the translator, so which will
mm.
help us to convert the our language into the mission language into the our simple English language, which we can understand. So what
Right.
happens is now you have the 53 reserved words and you have this proper definition for the 53 reserved words, right? This has to be
Mm,
work like this. This has final should be we cannot change the value, or we cannot override the final method. We cannot extend the like that. You will get the same some compile errors means they have some instructions they have defined. Likewise, when you perform the file operations, or there is an option to create the object for a class. Class dot for name is the predefined method which will help you to create object for the class. Okay, what it
mm,
will says is you are passing some class name. So jdbc com.jdbc.driver or something that you are passing. What will happen is it will look for the class. If the class is present, okay, the code will be executed. If the class is not present, you will get the error. So
mm,
what happened here is JVM is identified that this is the predefined library. First thing, this is the JRE library, or this is some jar file that you have included in your project. So JVM
mm,
will identify that, and it will see that what was the implementation that was present inside that. They did them some object related stuff and reading the properties and how they are reading, and what is the throws syntax that they have used. So when they have written a code, when you have written the code, you are handling the try and catch block to make sure your flow is executing. Likewise,
mm.
when they have implemented the predefined library, they have also done the same thing to make sure that code is working fine. So now the JVM is identified. Boss, you are inheriting the predefined library that is for name. When you do the for name, I would recommend you to have the class not found exception, because this is the super class
Mm,
for name.
mm,
So you are extending the feature in this class. It is the subclass. When the super class is throwing an exception, when you do the override, you have to throw that exception. Otherwise, you will get a chance to get an exception. That's what it will recommend. That's why these are the compile time exception. Because during the compilation itself, JVM is identified that you are using from XY factory, XY jar. In the XY jar, they have handled this exception. It is mandatory to have this exception. All the compile time exceptions you are getting, the reason because they are already defined and we have dot classes for the specific libraries. Dot class will be present in our JRE. So now if I show you that scenario, right? So now I'm just using some simple, even I can write it in the main method. So what I'm doing is class dot for name. Okay, I'm passing some name. Assume I'm passing null or something.
Mhm.
Actually, the code, whatever I have written is valid code. This is how we have to create object. But
Mhm.
what it is saying is unhandled exception type class not found exception. Why? Because when you see this implementation, this is the class dot class. This is one of the object class actually belongs to
Mhm.
Java law. And here, if you see the method, uh, how you can see that method? You just need to click Control, long press, and you can go to the implementation. Now you can see for name. Here, what it is showing is you are utilizing this method or inheriting this method where it is throwing the class not found exception. This is super class.
Mhm.
The text demo is subclass because it is inheriting the features of class. Okay, super class feature has to be inherited here. Then it is recommended. Now itself we have explained this one. When a super class throws the exception, we have to throw the exception. When a super class throws the exception type, you have to throw the exception type. This is a subclass. I would recommend you to have this syntax. Okay,
Yeah.
this is one thing. If in case, if I take some different scenario, file input output stream of FIS equals to new file input output stream and new of file, and you can pass the path name. That syntax I have written is absolutely fine. So this is how we will read the file. The syntax whatever I have written is true, but
Mhm.
what it is saying is, boss, there is something you have to do that. What it will tell, you have unhandled exception, file not found exception. What happens is JVM is recognized that when they try to use this library, they are handling this exception because there will be a chance of getting the file not found exception. You might gives the wrong file name or path name will not match or you are not giving the right path. A lot of things are there. You are giving the lowercase file name. This all things where it was there file input output stream. It is already compiled, sorry, translated code. When you see this dot class file 01. So these all are present in the where it will present. It is present in the JRE, right? So now
Yeah.
what's happening is you are using this class, I would recommend you to have this implementation. Most of the times we will ask for what are the example for the checked exceptions. Class not
Mhm.
found exception, file not found exception, SQL exception,
Mhm.
interrupted thread exceptions. These all are the different exceptions that we will get into the compile time. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Now, this one runtime exceptions. Runtime exceptions are the exceptions which you will get because of developer mistake. This you are getting because of developer, not free-defined library. This is the developer mistakes. So what is the developer mistake actually? So you are getting some input from the another system. You are not
Mm.
validating that system and you are trying to do some manipulation. If you are not validating and you're trying to do the manipulation, there will be chance of getting exception. For example, I am getting the null response from the DB and I am doing null dot equals and I'm comparing with some input. Now, null operation that you are performing, then you will get the null pointer exception. I have a
Mm.
input string. I'm getting a name, and I was trying to see whether the length. Sorry, I wanted to get the last character, and I'm giving the 10th index, and 10th index is not present in the name. Now I will get the string index outbound exception. So these are the developer mistakes actually during the runtime. Whatever exception that you are getting, so those are the runtime exceptions. Best example for the runtime exceptions here, arithmetic and IO exceptions. Sorry, not IO exceptions, arithmetic exception, string index outbound exception, null pointer exception, array index outbound exception. Okay, so these all are the some common runtime exceptions usually we will get, right?
So yeah, one question here. So
Yes,
this runtime exception, it can be in any stage, right? In build running state or some like the
yes.
when the process
It
starts, right?
is it is in the running state actually. During the runtime, it will occur actually, not in the
Yeah.
compile time. It will be in purely runtime.
Okay, yeah. So and that compile time is at a new stage. So everything is
Yes, that will be in the
pre-defined.
compile state because that is having the predefined library. JVM will
Yeah.
validate because that library is present in the JRE, right? So how
Mm.
we are when you mention plus, how JVM will knows that you are doing the addition. Likewise, when you do or use any predefined method, it is already
Mm.
present as JRE library. I will show you these classes. Even it
Mm.
was present in the java.long package. When I expand the JRE, uh, JRE and Java base, java.long package, and there will be class called dot class. So these all are already present in the JRE.
Yeah, right.
So that's
Yeah.
why if I take any of the another class java.io, so in the java.io package, there will be class called a file input output stream. Okay, how they have defined for the reserved words, the same way we have the reserved words. In case if you are writing some code, for example, session factory and session factory object equals to, you are trying to access that one by using the create session or session factory object that you are creating. And if
Mm.
you are not adding the jar, then it will not give the any related exception. The moment I add the jar, it will recommend me to have the SQL exceptions, decision related exceptions. It will recommend because until unless you haven't add that free defined library into this JRE or else Maven repository, whatever it may be, your system does not know what has to be done,
Mm.
right? So that is where it will work. Next exception types compile time. Then next important things are user defined exception.
Mm.
So user defined exception. Can we create the exceptions, user defined exception by extending the runtime exceptions? One of the interview question that I have faced actually. So usually how we will create the user defined exception. So you have to do For example, I have the system maintenance window I have, or else there is some API that is not responding. For example, I am using the government site for accessing the art memberships, and the data that they are providing invalid. And now I wanted to communicate with the end user friendly message saying that pass whatever the user ID number that you are provided, that is invalid number. If you're giving some internal server error, that they will not understand, whomever using that application, right? They will not understand because they are belongs to the CSR team, customer support representative team, or else direct end users. So now we have to convey the error message to end users in a proper way. To handle that one, we have the custom defined exceptions. First, why they have introduced custom defined exceptions is to convey the issue to the end user or CSP as a proper manner. So your API, you are communicating with one API or membership, and they are giving the
Mm,
invalid or member actually. And you
mm,
are giving the internal server error, you are not able to perform the operation from backend, and you will throw the invalid server error, internal server error. This is 501 exception that you are giving. So they will not understand what mistake they did by seeing the 501 error. They don't know what is the mistake that they have did. So why? Because they are not technical guys, right? So now
mm,
in this case, what we have to do is we have to have this user defined or custom exceptions. What these custom exceptions will do? Basically, by extending the exception class, you can create your own exception. Why Java is not creating all the exception? The reason because Java don't know what features that human being wants. If we have the many countries and many states, many number of peoples, whomever like what they want, the JVM will not know, and we don't have a set of space to identify all the different kind of exception, and we can keep it. So that's why Java is giving the option to create your own exception. Only thing
mm,
that you have to do is you have to extend the exception class, make your exception class however you want. For example, I wanted to create an exception, invalid or member exception. I am creating a class which is extending the exception class. Now I have the invalid auth membership exception I have created. Now I can throw the exception when I wanted to throw the exception.
mm.
The core interview question is, can we create the custom defined exception by extending the runtime exception? Okay, you're clear? So the
Yeah.
interview question is, what if I wanted to create exception that has to be extends the runtime exception? Yes, you can create it. You can create it the runtime exception, and when you wanted to throw that exception, how you have to throw off new and custom defined exception name you have to write. If that constructor wants to give some string message or input string, that you have to pass in the simple statement. Are clear?
Yes, 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 nice.
Basically, what happens? I
Mm,
have to create. How I can create is, so this is how I have created an exception class. Here, only thing I have to do is, it is a simple Java class. Now I
mm.
have to convert this into
Runtime
exception. That is
exception.
possible. Okay. If I wanted to mark, we are getting this error during the runtime, you can
Mm,
extend the runtime exception. Only thing that you have to do is you have to create the constructor, and you wanted to give some message. that will be understanding by the user. Simply what you have to do is you have to pass the string parameter to this one. Mostly we will do the same thing, string parameter and the exception that we will give it. So now here we will have the loggers, basically log dot info. Here it is
Mm,
not printing but log.info. Time being I will do this is out statement, but in a real time you are not recommended to use the this
system.
exception, right? This statements you cannot write
Right.
like this. And
Right.
I have this one, right? So I have, if you want to try to some logic also you can write it. So now
Mm,
what will happen is I just want to write some code, create new class text. I'm creating the simple class where I have this one main method, and
mm,
you are giving the input as a string. Okay, so they are giving the arc number. Okay, and they are giving some value. So it will be the alphanumerical value. Assume this is alphanumerical value. So what I wanted to see is if that is not having the valid one, and you try to check with the DB, basically what will happen is this will give internet server exception because that was not present. You are trying to fetch some data that was not there. Now what I'm
mm,
doing is if the length, whatever the condition I wanted to write, if the length AARP dot length, okay, less than or equals to 15. Okay, so now what I'm telling is boss just new, sorry, throw we will use to throw the custom defined or any exception when you want to throw forcefully.
mm,
When you wanted to throw means that system is not giving. The code that you have written is not giving. Okay,
uh,
you forcefully wanted to throw the exception to make sure this is the error. I cannot proceed further. That's why I am trying to write my own exception. Now what
mm,
I'm doing is invalid auth member exception. Here, if I wanted to give some message that will be readable message to the end user,
mm,
please enter 15 digit or number. So that what will happen is the length is less than 15 only. Otherwise, it will not come to this loop and it will not give the error message. Now, when I run this one, please
yeah.
digit number. This is the one which is giving the exception because the one that you have provided is invalid. Mostly they will ask how to create it. And can we, here I have extended the runtime exception. Okay.
Right.
So, so that is your choice. You can extend the exception or you can have the runtime exception. You're clear? Any questions, please?
No, Naresh, I think, yeah, I'm good on this.
Okay, user defined exception, you are clear, and we can have
Yeah.
the user defined extended. And the next one that I wanted to tell you is if I miss something, let me recall one more time.
Right, guys. So every time the try catch block, when it is necessary, try and catch block, or what is that?
See,
Sometime you can
why
just put
we need the
throw.
try catch block actually? So to avoid the termination flow actually when there is an issue, right? So suspect code, when you have the suspect code, we have to use the try catch block. So that is the reason we are using that one. Hmm, to exceptions.
Uh, um, so if we don't believe that it will it will terminate the flow, then we can just put the throw in the throw exception, throw I exception, throw something the
Yes,
exception are.
you are correct. You can do the throw exception. That will also will help you to execute the smooth flow. But the thing is, here you know the suspect means
Mm,
there will be chance of getting the invalid exception. But
right.
where you don't know the suspect, what kind of exception that will gives the, based upon the code that you're writing. For example, I was trying to getting the input some name. Okay, a string they are providing from portal, they are providing string name. And what I thought is they have given the value and they are trying to access in me, but they haven't given the value. And I am
Mm,
trying to convert this into the uppercase, name dot to uppercase. Now
mm,
null operation you are performing, null exception. Okay, assume they are giving the number or they are giving the valid one, and I wanted to guess the surname that is starts with the first character or last character. I am trying to getting that one. After getting this name and that index, I am trying to check. In the index that was not present. So you are given clearly mentioned that last name should be minimum 4 digit, but they are
mm,
giving only one. For example, my case Nagesh and I'm giving B, and that
mm,
was not there. I am trying to get the last 4 digits as it is considering as the last name. But the thing is that was not present. Now I will get the string index outbound exception. When you don't suspect what kind of exception will throw, then how you
mm.
can handle? You cannot write multiple exception has to be thrown, and we cannot add the many statements in the code, right? In this case, each and every statement that you are writing in the Java class should have the throws block.
Okay.
You got it. First
Yeah.
validation, null pointer
Mm,
exception if it is not null, and second validation if it is a last 4 digit, it is not giving string index outbound exception. If
mm,
everything goes good and you're trying to check contains some value that raw present or some value is present, it's not presenting some value. Each and every line you have to write it. Now in the try and catch block, so what is your suspect code in the piece of lines, and you can tell me, I will keep that code inside the try block. So I will try to prioritize and I will give you the exception hierarchy. No matter it is belongs to the subclass or not, I will have the final sorry, before final I will have the top class that is exception. If it is not
mm.
falls under any category, I will consider that and I will take it as an exception. That's what we can do that,
Okay. Mm,
right? Any other questions from exceptions you have, or if I miss it to cover something?
mm. Yeah, I think that is good.
Mostly it is done, and we can do.